recognize that Rainy River District School Board is located on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe people and within Treaty 3 territory. And we also acknowledge this area to be the traditionally settled homelands of the Métis people. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Andrew Campbell. For those of you who haven't joined one of his speaker sessions yet, DR.ABC was our keynote speaker who presented to all staff on our first PD day at the start of the school year. He has a PhD in Educational Leadership Policy and Diversity and is a faculty member in the Masters of Teaching program at the University of Toronto. He's also an Ontario certified teacher and regularly teaches for TDSB. Dr. Campbell's series this spring have focused on the dangers of deficit thinking, having supportive high expectations for all students. And today and going forward, the focus will be on providing culturally responsive and relevant programming. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Campbell.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Carly. It's really interesting where we're going with this learning series. And thank you so much. I see some of the familiar faces. And I know, it's a small group today, so being on camera is good and important, and we kind of fill the space. So thank you so much for that. We want to get into the conversation about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy or teaching. And this is what a lot of us are talking about. This kind of conversation, and this conversation, I should say, is on the lips of so many people. What is it? Where are we going with this? How do we get here? Where are we coming from? Where it started? All those kind of conversations are happening, and they're happening in so many different spaces. And we have to be aware of where are we taking this process, right? Where are we taking this process for ourselves? And so I want us to begin with a few pictures. One of the biggest one is, there's going to be a video I'm going to show you later on from Dr. Nicole West Burns. And you're going to see the origin of this idea of culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, because it's not really new. So I don't want people to ever think, we are coming with something so new that, you have no idea what it is. And, we are the authority in it, or I am the authority in it, and you know nothing about it. That absolutely is not what I do. I don't believe in that. As a matter of fact, I believe that as educators, what we're supposed to be doing is sharpening our tools and adjusting our toolkits. So I want us to kind of frame this conversation. I know many of you have listened afterwards. I see the video, it's online. People watch this video afterwards, share it with your colleagues. And share it in your staff meetings. This is not about new pedagogy. It may be very new for some people, or they have not opened themselves up to it as yet. But a lot of what we have done in the past points to this. I want to take a minute to kind of center this conversation a little bit with Geneva Gay. At the top there, you see Gloria Layden Billings, which is the guru, one of the persons I admire most when it comes to her writing. Talking about culturally relevant pedagogy, right? That was just the pedagogy she focused on. And then Geneva Gay, which focused on culturally responsive teaching. And then there were many other persons talking about culturally responsive instruction, culturally sustaining pedagogy, constructivism, critical pedagogy, equity pedagogy, multicultural pedagogy. Something that I don't think we talk about a lot when it comes to this conversation is student identity. And if you look into the conversation, the kind of things we're talking about, you will think about student identity. Who are the students I am teaching? Who are these people in front of me? And then the next question you ask yourself, I like to break this down to when I go to a workshop. Who are my audience? Or who is my audience? And what are their background? What are they coming from? Are they big on Zoom? Are they teaching online for years? Are they new to teaching? Do they understand? You have to think about your students, think about your audience. Sometimes I smile, Carly, when I think of this kind of work. And when I do a workshop on public speaking, and I said, these are the same principles, knowing who I'm teaching, knowing who is in front of me, and then learning how to adjust your pedagogy. But there's another thing I want to underline, not just student identity. I want to underline student lived experience. So we talk about student identity, student lived experience. Please zero in on this. I've been waiting for this conversation this afternoon. I know we only have about 55 minutes together, but I wanted us to understand, because you know why? A lot of people are talking about this. And if you listen to the conversation out there, William or Barbara or Brad, you would actually think that CRRP is about getting a set of books about a particular topic. And the truth is, I will never bash that, because that's a start. So, you know, when your librarian put together all these books on Ramadan, for instance, and she said, you can come and borrow the Ramadan bin. You know that context. I've been a school teacher for years. Nothing is wrong with that. She's been intentional about the materials. And she said, oh, it's Black History Month. I've gathered a lot of good books about Black history. Come and borrow the Black History bin. Nothing is wrong with that. The problem is we walk away thinking that is culturally responsive thinking. It's not a box of book. It's not a box of book. It's more about student identity and student lived experiences. And as a teacher, how will I making sure my students know that the lessons is prepared for them? So watch this carefully. Let's get into it. I'm going to show you two pictures I have for you. So this is the first one. This is you, Carly. Carly, you're on the left. Carly, you are ready to teach. You're an amazing teacher. If you notice, you are prepared. Nobody can blame you, Carly. You are prepared. You have a snowsuit on. You have on your gloves. I love your hat you're wearing, Carly. Your chart is there with the snowballs. Your little stickers in your hand to point. Like, come on, Carly. You are ready to go. So I want to establish that, because I want you to understand it is not about you not knowing what to do. It's about student identity, student lived experience, and how you're going to teach effectively. So that's a student over there, Carly. So you're a great teacher. Oh, amazing. And then that's your student. He's coming to school. Maybe that, so watch me carefully, William. Maybe that student over there is a new immigrant. How about that, right, William? Maybe that student is new to the community, not a Rainy River District person. He may be from City of Toronto, urban community, not used to your space. That student may also come from an LGBTQ home. That student may also be a new immigrant, so doesn't speak any Canadian English as yet, speak other languages, however, many other concerns. So lived experience, identity meets amazing teacher Carly. Carly begins the teaching. Carly says snowballs. The child says, what? I thought those were coconuts. You see what happening? It's a disconnect, because not that Carly has not been an effective teacher, but Carly forget to consider who is before her in a very, very, very intentional way. And what are you seeing? And I had a big joke the other day when I used this lesson, because I said the teacher has seen snowballs, the student has seen coconuts, maybe it's on the Caribbean, and then somebody raised their hand and said, actually, I was thinking ice fishing. I had no idea. And everybody in the room was like, wow, true. So there we have three different perceptions. The problem is, who are our students and how do we use their cultural reference to meet them? Okay, so next one we have is one size does not fit all. And this is another issue we have had, because we believe, we're going to do one thing. I can tell you one of my most liberating, notice my choice of words today, one of my most liberating pedagogy and work has been how intentional I am these days about ensuring that I give opportunities and choices to my students, my adult students, because I realize one size cannot fit all. Not everybody wants to write an essay. Not everybody wants to do certain things. And if we're sticking to the one size fit all method, what is going to happen is that some students will automatically be left behind. And so these principles are not new. Differentiated instruction, I'm going to invite that in the conversation. Universal design for learning, I'm going to invite that in the conversation, right? Accommodations, I'm inviting that in the conversation. Spending time to know your students, I'm inviting that in the conversation. So as we talk about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, here are a couple of questions I want us to ask ourselves. Who is represented in the curriculum materials? We're not going to go in the breakout room. I'm going to do that myself. So we may finish a little earlier because we're not going to do the breakout room, right? Small group, we're not going to go there. Who is represented in your classroom materials? And how are they represented? Who is represented on your staff? Who is not represented? Who is represented in the pictures on the wall? How are the people with diverse sexual orientation represented in the curriculum, schoolroom, and the school? How are diverse families and households represented? You know, today, let me go back to the one about sexual orientation. Today, I had a conversation at a big day today, an amazing day this morning. The Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic District had a conversation with their student leadership about 2S LGBTQAI+. Believe it or not, an amazing day today. They had that conversation because many students are invisible in the school. And the students were able to say in very clear way how they felt invisible. How none of your families are discussed, how none of your identities are shared or discussed. But you are in the school, you're sitting in the seat. So sometimes as educators, we are pretending like we don't see the students. So we have also made them invisible. They made themselves invisible because of, you know, fear of discrimination, marginalization, embarrassment, all that kind of stuff. But we have also made them invisible when we have excluded them from the curriculum. You know, this morning I must give you this example. This morning in my workshop, I challenged the school. I said, how many of you have had a discussion about First Nations people going to see the Pope? How many? You're a Catholic school board. How many of us have had that discussion? Think about that for a minute. These are the kind of relevant, responsive conversations we cannot avoid if we're going to have students who are critically conscious. Now, remember I said that, because we're coming back to that, who are critically conscious. How are we having those conversations? Could you be in a school, a Catholic school board, and not have a conversation about the First Nations people of Canada going to Rome, to the Vatican, to see the Pope? Think about that. Think about the level of cultural competence that was missed if you didn't have that conversation. So the question is right there. Where are First Nations, Métis, Inuit represented? How are they represented? Not just where, but how. I want you to understand this is a very big for me, because a lot of people will say, well, I have blacks. I remember this conversation, Barbara, when I said to the librarians, I said, go back to your library and look on the wall, how many pictures, count how many pictures on the wall, tell me how many are represented with persons of color. They came back, they told me yes, and, you know, and they said, and I said, how many pictures of people of color, how are they represented? And somebody raised their hand, Connie, and she said, you are right, Dr. Campbell. I had one picture of a black guy and he's playing basketball. That is it, right? So if we continue to push those stereotypes, now you may say to me, because this is very important, we are recording this, I want people to listen to it and, you know, ask each other questions and discuss it. You may say to me, well, Dr. Campbell, isn't that basketball, you know, black guys love? I would say yes, but not only black men play basketball. We could have a white guy playing basketball. We could have an Asian guy playing basketball. We could have a First Nation person playing basketball. We could have a girl playing basketball. We have to realize that when we make these stereotypical assumptions and we do the stereotypical images in our school, we are not helping our children to grow. Get ready for my second. I just gave a second hint about the 3 tenets. We are not allowing our students to grow in cultural competence. So let me rush to that and come back. I want to jump there what I just said. I just want to do something and I come back to this conversation. So what I want to do is I wanted to show this for a minute. Yeah, I want to show this. That's fine. It's our PowerPoint. We can go back and forth as we please. It's our PowerPoint. So what I did at the beginning there was talk about the middle piece. You know, Carly mentioned the first piece, the high expectations. So these are one of the 3 tenets. Carly had a lot of conversation. We talked a lot about holding high expectations for all students. If you missed the video, please go and watch it. That's the first tenet. First tenet. You can't be culturally relevant and responsive if you do not believe in the kids. Point blank, no apology for that. And we're going to have a video in a couple minutes from, I'm going to share with you. And you're going to realize that CRRP came out of it came out of anti-oppressive work. It didn't come out of beautiful picture books. It came out of anti-oppressive work. That's why we always say culturally relevant pedagogy is an empowering pedagogy. Watch me carefully. It's an empowering pedagogy. It's a liberating pedagogy. Bettina Love called it an abolitionist pedagogy. It's about building your students. It's not about a box of books. It's not about just this one beautiful chart. When you do those things, they are very important, but you cannot stay there. I was doing an interview the other day, and I had to talk a lot about embody, how you embody. Think about it. When you talk about being anti-racist, ask yourself, do I embody anti-racism? Do I embody it? Am I just a teacher who reads an article, reads a magazine, reads something, and then when I read something, I go, oh yes, here is this about racism or anti-Black racism, and then that's done. But when I'm on vacation and I see something racist, I'd be like, oh, I couldn't care less. When I'm at the cottage, when I'm out with my friends, I'm at the mall, I'm at Starbucks, and I see or hear something racist, I'm with my friends, and something happens, and I just ignore it because I'm not at school, I'm not doing a racism topic today. You know what happens? It says you are not embodying the work. So when you have embodied the work, it's about liberation, empowerment, it's about freedom, it's about anti-oppressive practice. So as you're looking at my slides and you're seeing that middle piece is important. Because when I use the example today about the Vatican and the First Nations persons going there, I say to them, assisting students in developing a cultural competence. And then the last one there, guiding students to develop a critical cultural consciousness. Should I fix that S there? Like, what do you feel about that? Should our First Nations people travel all the way to Rome for an apology? What do you feel? Talk about that. And as a matter of fact, oh, we're talking about traveling to Rome. I guess we have forgotten about the murdered children. So what about the critical cultural consciousness? Bringing our students to a place where they question things. Now, let me give you a good example, William, of what critical cultural consciousness looks like. Write this example down, William, as we are talking together. I don't know if you ever teach grade 5 or grade 6, William, but I taught it for a while. And on that topic, we talk a lot about refugee. Now, Tracy, if you have ever seen refugee in school, language, we have two pictures. We have two refugee pictures, which all of us know. The first one is the little black boy somewhere in Africa. He's in his underwear, torn up, dirty. There's mucus running down. You can see he hasn't bathed. His belly is big because that means he's suffering from some form of malnutrition. He's crying, tear-stained eyes, and we say, give $10 or send a goat. Refugees, right? We see that. Deficit, you talk about a Carly coming out of deficit. Then we see the next picture, Tracy. And that one is often the little girl in the bed. She's in some ruin, picking up something on the ground. You know that picture. Behind her is the ruined building. She's either in Syria or Afghanistan, right? Refugee. All of a sudden, Tracy, get ready for me, Tracy, because I know you're ready. All of a sudden, Tracy, we got up one morning and we see a lot of people who are white. They are in certain positions, look like they are privileged. They are crying. They are in Ukraine. They are calling themselves refugee. Critical cultural consciousness. The students now are confused because you can be white. As I said in the news, white people with blue eyes are refugees. And that's why the world is reacting a certain way. Now, students have asked a question. You and I may not want to go there, but students are saying, well, I didn't know you could be a refugee like that. Because what we know about refugees is this. Because as an educator, we are not pushing our children to the critical cultural consciousness. I think now you get it. It's more than the box of books. It cannot be the box of books because the box of books is limited, right? So it's more about holding our expectations, assisting our students to develop cultural competence, exposing them. I was talking to a teacher yesterday in a workshop. She was just amazing. She teaches a course, they talk about foods a lot. And she said, white teacher, she said, whenever I do my lessons, I bring in every single reference you could. He said, I have a whole bunch of reference I use from different cultures. So the students get to understand that this is different here from the next place, but all of them are valuable. All of them are valued. And that's where you raise your children cultural competence. Carrie, my favorite line is always to say, Black History Month is not for the Black kids only. It's for all the kids to grow in cultural competence. Right? Somebody's mic is on, to grow in cultural competence. So that is it. All right. So let's get back into our conversation. Let's go back a little bit further. So we were right here in this conversation about these questions. So when you think about these questions, you are positioning yourself a certain way. So let's move on. So I love this. Our schools and classrooms should be places where students' lived experience are valued and celebrated, where they see themselves in the curriculum, where they are authentically engaged, and where barriers to their success are identified and removed. Our governance and human resource practices will support welcoming, safe, and inclusive learning environments and ensure that those who serve our communities reflect our diversity. And that is from the Toronto Catholic District School Board in their equity plan. And so 6 things came out. And one of those 6 things, I want you to remember, get ready now. We just talked about empowering, liberating, anti-oppressive, cultural competence, cultural consciousness, anti-oppressive. Look at what is out of this. Students' lived experience are valued and celebrated. Ask yourself, let's ask ourselves 6 quick questions. Number 1, in my classroom, are my students' lived experiences valued and celebrated? And if not, how can I do that? You know, yesterday I had one of the most beautiful workshops, and I asked the people to load up, on the Jamboard, what would a classroom, when they consider culturally relevant responsive pedagogy, what are some of the things that comes to their mind to let that classroom be more? And I shout out the word community. Before I could write it down, 2 persons at the same time were writing the word community. How are we using community, Liv? Good to see you. Are we using community in our work? Are we using community? When I look on the board, I saw 3 persons put the word parents. How are we using parents? Some of us, we are beating around to get guest speakers. Sometimes we forget parents can be amazing guest speakers in our communities. Next one, they see themselves in the curriculum. How are we making sure students see themselves? This morning, I told a group, I said, and a group, she confessed. I said, if you teach a family, what picture you use all the time? They said it. The picture we use all the time is a man, a woman, a boy and a girl with a dog and a cat in front of a big house with 2-car garage with a nice green grass, a tree with some red apples on it. We know that picture. That's not the only family. So when you don't show other families, they don't see themselves. They don't see themselves. Authentically engaged. What does that look like when you said students are authentically engaged? What does that look like? Barriers to their success are identified and removed. I want to have this conversation with us today because I want us to understand it is more than just the books, the stories. Those are very important, but you have to think beyond that. The cultural competence, welcoming safe environment, and that we reflect those we serve. So here's where we're going to go. I use this for years, for a good while, and I always try to explain to people when I think they got an aha moment after these 2 pictures when they said, oh, now I understand what you mean by anti-oppressive. So when we look at this classroom, this example of equality, equity, and reality, we ask ourselves 3 questions. Which students are unable to see the game? And what are those fences in our school? And who is standing on boxes? It's very important we have this conversation. Always ask ourselves, who are able to see the game? What are those fences in our school? Who is standing on box? So everybody take a quick picture of this for me. We're going to pause the video and we're going to go for 5 minutes, more than 5 minutes, just to talk to each other about those 3 things. Who's unable to see the game? Fences and boxes. We're going to do a 5 minutes quick chat, and then we're going to come back quickly. So we're going to put a pause. You know, I always put a pause there on the video, and then stop sharing for a minute, and then we just have a quick conversation there. All right, so welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Make sure your mic is off. Thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for those conversation, right? Important. And so let us jump back right into it. So when we left out here, we were talking the idea of fences, right? The game, fences and boxes. And we have conversation about who is unable to see. Now let me explain the connection to deliberating. So on the next slide, we see another thing. So if you look at the side, how can we use our position of power and privilege as educator to liberate our students? And the word that comes to mind is inclusionary pedagogy. Pedagogy that empowers, right? Those are the words we're using: empowering, liberating, anti-oppressive, abolitionist pedagogy, right? Abolitionist, right? Thinking about those things. How do we move from there? And so culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, I love this simple definition from Gloria Lady Billings. It's an approach that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitude. So what we're going to do before we go into anything is I'm going to take a couple minutes and we're going to watch this video. So we're going to watch a video. I'm going to include this video, about 4 minutes on it, and then we're going to give you some more context. So we're going to use that video to gain some more context. All right, so let's go. And this video, of course, will come to you from Nicole Westburn.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nicole Westburns, and I'm here today to talk about culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy, affectionately known as CRRP. So in the Ontario context, really what that means is that we're attempting to engage in a pedagogical approach that actually recognizes that the schooling system is not fair and equitable for all students. And what CRRP is based on are two bodies of work from the states: culturally responsive teaching and culturally relevant teaching and pedagogy, which come from a place of saying that we recognize that the schooling system is not for all students. This work was actually predicated upon the experiences of Black students in schools in the United States, knowing that the educational system was failing them in many ways. And what these two bodies of work do is they help us to understand possibilities for us as educators to think differently, right? A lot of the literature at the time that these two bodies of work came forward was really tied to deficits tied to Black kids and their ability to even learn. And the creators of this work knew that these were nothing but racist ideologies that really fed that kind of thinking. And so what they said is, we're going to look at ways to make the educational environment more successful, but the onus is on us, right? This is about a system that actually is a part of systems of oppression that operate in society. And so what can we do as educators to push back to that? So I always want to be clear that CRRP is not a multicultural approach. Although there are components of honoring identity and diversity within, it is an approach that actually recognizes it's more closely tied to critical social justice, that there are oppressions that exist in society, that in order for us to really move students forward, that we need to recognize that and we need to address that within our actions. CRRP is an active pedagogical approach that is pushing back to dominant ideologies and pushing back to dominant narratives, while at the same time helping us to move students forward in classroom spaces. In the Canadian context, in the Centre for Urban Schooling in 2008, we pulled culturally responsive and culturally relevant together. We amalgamated them because we thought that they fit nicely together in terms of helping to build success. We also broadened it for us to think about culture not in really monolithic ways, but culture as complex and tied to the intersectionality of identities that students have. And I think that's a mistake that we make sometimes. We want to relegate certain groups of students to being one way, but identity is very complex, and we need to understand that as we engage in this work. Additionally, what we did is we said, if we want to think about CRRP, we need to think about it not just an individual teacher operating in their own classroom space, but how do we really think about stretching this, expanding this into all areas of equity that are important in schools for us to think about. And so we developed 7 tenets, myself and my co-writer, we were the lead writers on the text, Karen Murray from Toronto District School Board. We created the text, the equity continuum. And within it, we have 7 tenets of things we need to think about as we apply this lens of CRRP. So we want to think about our classroom climate and instruction. We want to think about the student voice and space. We want to think about school climate. We want to think about community connections. We want to think about the ways that we're engaging and valuing parents and caregivers. And we want to think about school leadership. And furthermore, which ties really a lot into the critical consciousness component of culturally relevant teaching, we want to think about how are we building our knowledge as professionals doing this work.
All right, so we can stop there. So, and those 7 things, I see some of you trying to write them down. There's going to be an entire slide with them, so you can get that later. So I want you to understand, like as Nicole Westburn talks about, is about where it's coming from. Professor Nicole Westburn talking about where it's coming from, where the intention is from. That's why I keep using the word liberating, the word empower, the word anti-oppressive. It comes from that part. And I love the idea. I hope everybody got that. I put that in red in my book, that culture is complex and it's intersectionality of culture. So we cannot just say, well, that person is Muslim because she's wearing a hijab, but that person have intersectionality, Muslim and Black. Muslim who identify as SL and 2 as LGBTQ. Absolutely. That's a level of complexity and a level of intersections that we have to think about when we think about our students and all of that. Okay. So let's move on from that. Lovely, lovely. So we're going to underline that. So in light of that, I really want to share with you 2 amazing quotes. And they come to us from Dr. Bettina Love, a book I'm reading right now. We want to do more than just survive. Our book is called We Want to Do More Than Just Survive. We want to do more than just survive. About abolitionist, yeah, word keep troubling me, right? Abolitionist teaching and the pursuit of educational freedom. Powerful book. And here's one quote I love from it. She said, I've taught so many future educators and worked with hundreds of in-service teachers who profess to love all kids and have good intentions to be fair and just in their classrooms, yet they write, say, and partake in racist actions and posts online about dark children loosely masked in language of low expectations of judging our low-income parents and dark children's behavior. So we're talking about a pedagogy that hold high expectation. We're talking about a teacher who hold high expectation. How do you embody that? What does that look like? And then the next quote comes from her, which I love. She said, too often we think about fighting oppression is just intellectual. The real work is personal, emotional, spiritual, and communal. It is explicit with a deep and intense understanding about loving Blackness is an act of political resistance, and therefore it's the fundamental aspect of teaching dark kids. Those 2 came from the pedagogy about how do we make our work liberated. So this was just an example of racialized kids and that kind of stuff. So we came back to this finally, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes to this. And what I want to show you, that critical consciousness, there was a picture I want to share with you. And this picture I want to share with you. This picture came to us from the article, the package that Professor Nicole Westburn also worked on. And it's an example where a child is an activity that encourages that critical cultural consciousness, right? And some of you do this. You do this already, but how do you have conversations about it? So projects like these encourage students to become informed about current issues and engage in advocacy through writing essays, collecting data, and even writing letters to politicians as seen here. I was at a workshop myself, not me teaching, me learning, and the conversation came up about critical cultural consciousness and how you discuss. And there was a maths example in, quite interesting. And it was an inner city school. and using maths for CRRP. It was one of those TED Talks. And she said the teacher asked the students to count how many liquor store was in this particular neighborhood, which in I think is 100 whatever 1,000 whatever radius or something. And in that particular place, they counted 11. They made a field trip, and she took them to a middle class, upper class neighborhood, and they counted maybe 1. She asked them, what do you think is happening here? Critical consciousness about how oppression works, how food works, how stores work, why certain things are located in certain places. I've had children, I remember one day a child literally asked about which park they want to go, and they want to go to the park, the Pretty Park. I remember this conversation, and the Pretty Park is located in not their neighborhood. And the little child asked, why is not their neighborhood don't have a pretty park? That is oppression. That is systematic issues. That is socioeconomic. Those are political things where certain communities are given less. So those are the kind of conversations we are having. Like how the person asked, about who is a refugee and why we see people on refugee on TV looking like this. My kids in grade 6 that time wrote letters to the politicians, asking for the Syrian refugee children to come to our school. We wanted them to come to our school, and they wrote those letters for me to show me they were demonstrating the empathy, the critical consciousness, the cultural competence. They understood that these were children who weren't in school because of war, and they wanted them at our school at the time. That's the kind of place you want to get your kids, where they understand what empathy looks like. These are all included in the conversation, And so in that assignment, the maths assignment, the person gave the maths assignment, and she said they did the field trip and they wrote letters requesting to close down 7 of the 11 liquor stores. And they discussed the impact on their families of 11 liquor stores. Think about that for a minute. 11 liquor stores in a community. What do you think happening there? What do you think the children are seeing there? How do we allow them as teachers to dream beyond those 11 liquor stores? How do we hold high expectations for them? Do we say to them, well, your father is drunk, this is that, you come from, and you just leave it like that? Or it's your job to hold the high expectations? And I'm telling you right now, if you're watching this video and you didn't watch the previous video, which is about holding high expectation, make sure you check it out, because it's very important about the conversation we are having. So in wrapping up this conversation, we're talking about the 3 tenets. And these are the 7 considerations that in the video we talked about. When you think about culturally relevant responsive pedagogy, these we said are the tenets, the underpinning, right? But these are some of the considerations come to us. And that's an article there. Take a picture so you could find the article. It was coming from the Professional Learning Series, Cultural Responsive Relevant Pedagogy. I could give a copy of it. I'm sure I have a copy. Could send and share with you as well. But I know it's online because I got it online. Okay? Very interesting. And they're actually examples of activities you can use in each of the 3 areas to raise your student cultural competence. So it's a very good resource. And we think about classroom instruction. So ask yourself about your classroom instruction. Ask yourself about classroom climate, student voice, student leadership, community connection, school and family relationship, and your own professional development. You having this series, you engage in these conversations is critical for your professional development. So you are demonstrating that. How are we giving student voice and space? I can tell you, I have grown as an educator in using student voice and space, because I come from that old school where you believe that your voice is supposed to be the most powerful voice. Years ago, I realized my voice should not be the most powerful voice. Our students are capable, and we are supposed to give them space and allow them to help us create the learning environment. What is your classroom climate like? What are the messages on the wall? As we go back to the first question, how are different people represented? Not just who is represented, but how. That's a big one. Not just who is represented, but how. Because we have seen a lot of, we get caught up in stereotypical representation and we fall back, as you said, Carly, at the beginning, in the deficit narrative. We fall back in the deficit narrative. Cultural competence. I always tell the story of kids who are in Atlanta who have never traveled before. Only what they see of Jamaica is in a magazine or what they heard. And they asked me a whole bunch of questions about Jamaica. And some of the questions were very deficit. If I lived in a treehouse, if I swim every day, if we fish, where's my Rasta locks and that kind of stuff. But they weren't being rude. They weren't being rude. They were amazing kids. They lacked cultural competence. So one of the things you have to remember, as you get to know your students, also let them get to know you. I say it all the time. Teachers spending quality time getting to ask their students questions and asking and getting information, but the students know nothing about their teacher. Tell them your story. Tell them who you are. Talk about yourself. I teach a master's course at Queen's, and one of the first assignments, they put this book together about the story of themselves. When I was doing the course, and I got it from someone, I was like, whoa, assignment values so much points just about themselves. But when you get into those, like an autobiography, it's so powerful because there's certain guiding questions we ask them to use. And it's such a valuable activity. And they appreciate it because they said they have never gotten an opportunity like that to think about who they are. Think about their positionality. Think about how their positionality intersects and interacts with their work and their teaching. So a lot of us need to think about those things as well. So we're going to close with this slide. And this slide is a reminder. I love this slide from Professor Ann Lopez, right here at the University of Toronto, where I work. I love this slide. It was on Twitter, and I've never tried to put it on any fancy slide. I want to keep it just like that because I think it's powerful. And she reminds us, implementing and embedding culturally responsive, appropriate, sustaining, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, decolonizing education takes planning and practice. Just so you know, when I do a workshop, because we do this topic as a workshop as well. When I do this as a workshop, we spend about 20 minutes in groups and we talk about planning, preparation, process, pedagogy, and practices. We look at how is our planning culturally relevant? How do we make sure we grow from that? Our processes, our classroom practices, the poems we use. There's so many little examples I could share with you of when teachers had an moment. I remember the story, quick one before we close, of students who graduated from a class that they learned about classical music. And the teacher never once mentioned that they were Black and Latina and other racialized opera singers. So these kids who are white walk away with an idea that opera singers are white, these white people. It's the same thing with ballet. We have to expose people. We don't even tell some of those stories. We have to expose and grow our students' cultural experience, our students' cultural competence, right? Build that up for them. Build that up. Use your power and your privilege to build that up. Your knowledge, your amazing work that you do as educators to build that up. So thank you for joining us again for another conversation in this next week. Now, I think I'm going to build this up, Carly, for a particular reason. I think I'm going to build this up because I know how good it is, not because I am the speaker. But next week, we're going to wrap up our series. Next week, yes, the 10th, week after next. And we are going to talk about the culturally responsive educator. We're going to focus on ourselves. It's going to be a really, really good conversation. So invite everybody you can out to have that conversation. Of course, it's being recorded, so the video will be there for persons. But we're going to now talk about us and how we use that pedagogy. Because remember, culturally relevant responsive pedagogy is a tool. It's a pedagogy. It's I like to say it's a part of our toolbox. But who is using the toolbox? Who are you using the toolbox? So let's have some discussion the next time we meet about that. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for listening. Carly, over to you for the final thank you.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming today. And thank you, Dr. Campbell, for your time and for drawing the connection between that critical consciousness piece and holding high expectations for all of our students, and really encouraging us to grow in our awareness of systemic oppression and how that's experienced by our students. So have a great evening, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Good to see everybody. Bye-bye.